There's a signal off the Oregon coast that shouldn't exist. It comes through the old maritime frequencies, those cold, crackling channels that most sailors abandoned decades ago. The locals say if you stay up past midnight and tune your radio just right, you'll hear a voice cutting through the static, calm, commanding, too deep to belong to a living man. They call it the captain's order. No one remembers who named it first. Maybe the sea did. Most people dismiss it as a hoax, a ghost story told by men who've spent too long at sea. But every few years, someone records it, just for proof. And what they catch never sounds the same. Sometimes it's a phrase, short and clipped. Maintain heading. The storm is closing in. Other times, it's just a number sequence, read like a naval code. But always, the same sign-off. Rourke, commanding. The name belongs to Captain Elias Rourke, the man who went down with his ship, the Sable Mare, in 1963. The wreck was never recovered. Only debris, oil, and whispers of a final transmission that shouldn't have survived. In Greyhaven, the fishing town nearest the wreck site, they still talk about the nights when the signal grows stronger. Radios in harbours start turning on by themselves, even when unplugged. Dock lights flicker in rhythm with a hidden pulse beneath the waves. Some claim to have heard their own names in the static, spoken in that same deep voice. One old sailor swears he heard his late brother call for help. Another said the voice offered him safe passage if he followed its coordinates. He vanished 2 days later. His boat was found drifting, radio still hissing softly. The Coast Guard once tried to trace the source. They triangulated it to a point 4,000 meters deep, near where the Sable Mare supposedly went down. But that's impossible. No active transmitter can function at that depth, especially not for 60 years. They filed the case as atmospheric interference, though the man who logged the report resigned the next day. Some people think it's electromagnetic echo, sound trapped in layers of pressure, bouncing endlessly through the ocean's bones. Others believe it's something else entirely, a command that never stopped transmitting, because the one giving it never stopped breathing. No one in Greyhaven touches Channel 17 anymore. Fishermen won't let their kids near old radios. And when the fog comes in thick, swallowing the town and muting the sea, they say you can still hear him calling through it. All stations, report. A voice that belongs to the deep. A voice that still wants to be obeyed. And if you listen long enough, it just might learn your name. Elliot Ward didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in frequencies, distortions, and the human mind's ability to build monsters out of static. For 10 years, he'd written articles dismantling local myths. The screaming mines of Nevada, the choir that sang beneath the lake, all just stories. When he first read about the captain's orders legend, he thought it would be the same. Romanticized nonsense built by coastal paranoia. So he packed his camera, audio gear, and a week's worth of notebooks, and drove north toward Greyhaven, the town where sailors claimed the sea could still talk back. Greyhaven was smaller than he expected. Just 2 crooked streets, a forgotten diner, and a harbor filled with boats that looked too tired to move. The locals spoke quietly, eyes darting toward the ocean even when the weather was calm. Salt coated everything, the windows, the railings, even the breath in the air. Elliot found lodging above an old bait shop, run by a widow named Mrs. Carver. She looked at his equipment with suspicion and said, "If you're here for the voice, don't tune in after midnight. That's when he listens too." Her words were meant as a warning, but Elliot only smiled. Every myth had its curfew. He told her he was chasing sound, not spirits. She just shook her head and handed him the key. He spent the next few days walking the coast, collecting ambient recordings for his piece. Waves slapping against the docks, wind rattling rusted buoys, the creak of old ships moored too long. He set up his recorder near the cliffs, adjusting the dial to channel 17, the infamous frequency. Nothing. Only the hum of static and the faint rhythmic pulse of the sea. He noted the interference levels, logged the temperature, and made observations like any journalist would. But the stillness of Greyhaven began to bother him. The town felt paused, like a photograph that never finished developing. Even the gulls seemed to fly quieter here. At night, he'd write from his desk overlooking the harbour. Through the fogged window, he could see the faint glow of the lighthouse rotating across the waves. The radio sat beside him, silent except for its low static hum. He'd tune it up, just a fraction past clarity, letting the noise fill the room as he typed. It was oddly comforting. The chaos of sound wrapped around him like white noise for the soul. But sometimes the static seemed to shift, like something was breathing on the other end. He caught himself staring at the speaker longer than he meant to, waiting for words that never came. Then he'd laugh, shut it off and remind himself, it's just airwaves. Still, before sleeping, he'd glance at the radio again, just to be sure the light was really off. By the fourth night, Elliot had grown used to the rhythm of the place, the fog, the silence, the waiting. He told himself he was close to proving the legend false. He even drafted the opening lines of his article. In Greyhaven, the only thing still transmitting from the deep is fear, but deep down, he knew the story wasn't finished. The equipment stayed on longer each night. The dials turned a little wider, the static a little louder, and somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, when the sea breeze slipped through the cracks of his window, he could have sworn he heard a voice whispering through the noise, steady, patient, and far too human. It happened on the fifth night. The fog had come in thicker than usual, rolling down from the cliffs like smoke spilling from a wound in the sky. The entire harbour disappeared beneath it, the world reduced to a faint hum of waves and the low groan of distant buoys. Elliot had left the radio running while he wrote, letting the soft static play in the background. Around 12:37 a.m. the hum broke. For a brief second the air thinned, like the whole room took a breath, and then a voice pushed through the noise. Deep, wet, calm. It said only 6 words. Crewman Ward, report to the bridge. The chair creaked as Elliot froze. He stared at the radio, waiting for the sound to repeat, but the signal was gone. Back to normal static, soft and meaningless. His heart beat so hard he could hear it echo in his ears. It said his name. Not Mr. Ward, not Elliot, just Crewman Ward. He laughed it off at first, shaky and dry, telling himself it was interference. Maybe a CB broadcast bleeding through from a fishing boat. But when he rewound the tape on his recorder and listened again, the words were still there. Too clear, too focused, too personal. His hands trembled as he checked the origin tag in the signal log. The coordinates blinked in digital green, latitude and longitude, that pointed not to any boat or station, but to an area more than 3,000 meters beneath the Pacific Ocean. By morning, Elliot had convinced himself it was a coincidence. He'd played the tape over and over, breaking down the voice's tone, timbre, and pitch. It was male, older, stern, maybe military, but waterlogged, as though every syllable had been spoken through salt and pressure. He sent the recording to his friend Mason, a sound engineer back in Portland, asking him to analyze it. Mason replied 6 hours later with a single sentence. "That's not radio interference, Elliot. That's a live voice." Attached was a spectrogram showing patterns that matched a human vocal transmission, not mechanical noise. The problem was, the frequency band it occupied shouldn't even exist anymore. It had been decommissioned in 1972. That evening, Elliot went to the harbour bar to clear his head. The locals stared when he walked in. Conversations dimmed like the tide had suddenly dropped. He asked an old fisherman at the counter about Channel 17, but the man didn't answer, just kept stirring his drink, eyes fixed on the window. Finally, Mrs. Carver appeared behind him, voice low. "You heard him, didn't you?" she said. "That's why you're pale as bone." Elliot tried to deny it, but she cut him off with a shake of her head. "You won't stop now. None of them ever do." She told him of her husband, a Navy operator who once claimed to hear the captain's orders. He followed the coordinates, vanished with his crew, and was found weeks later. Or rather, wasn't found. Only the boat returned. The radio on board kept repeating a message that never ended. "Storm closing in. Hold the line." When Elliot returned to his apartment, the radio was already on. He hadn't touched it. The dial glowed faintly, tuned perfectly to Channel 17. He stood in the doorway, cold rushing through him like the tide had climbed the stairs. The room smelled faintly of seawater. He stepped closer, breath shallow. Static rolled softly, hissing and breaking, until words began to form beneath it, like something trying to learn how to speak again. "Maintain. Heading," the voice croaked. "Maintain. Heading." Then silence. Elliot reached out and turned the dial off. But even with the radio unplugged, he could still hear it faintly behind him, whispering through the walls like the sea had found its way inside. He sat there until dawn, unable to move, the first rays of light crawling through the fog outside. The world looked calm again, almost normal. He laughed bitterly at his own fear and told himself he'd imagined it all. But when he opened his notebook, the words "Crewman Ward, report to the bridge," were written across the page in his own handwriting, ink still wet, letters trembling like they'd been written by a hand that wasn't his. The next morning, Elliot drove to the coast with the recording device still clutched in his hand. The fog had retreated, but the air carried the same metallic taste, like salt and static blended together. He couldn't stop thinking about those coordinates. Something about them felt deliberate, purposeful, as if the message hadn't just called to him, but for him. He parked near the edge of the old wharf, where the fishermen's boats rocked gently in the swell. When he asked about the location tied to his signal, no one answered. A few of the men looked up sharply, then turned away, pretending to check their nets. Only one spoke, a younger deckhand named Cole, who leaned close and whispered, "That's the trench. No one goes there. Depth pressure kills everything below 2,000. Then he paused, eyes darting nervously towards the grey horizon. "Except," he added, "something still moves there." Elliot spent the rest of the day tracing maritime logs, old naval maps and declassified records. The coordinates led to an unmarked sector in the Pacific. No shipping lanes, no sonar routes, nothing but black ocean stretching endlessly. Yet, tucked deep in a Cold War archive, he found a single reference. Project Lazarus. Status terminated. The report was brief, almost erased, but one line stood out. Submersible Unit 17 lost. Vessel presumed destroyed. Final transmission logged 03.14 hours. Operator reports visual contact with object resembling a ship. The description ended abruptly. No name, no follow-up, nothing. But the frequency tag matched Elliot's broadcast exactly. That meant whatever spoke to him had used the same line a vessel 40 years ago had died listening to. That night, The ocean felt alive. The tide hissed against the rocks below his apartment, dragging the stones back with a slow, grinding pull. Elliot set up his shortwave rig again, this time locking the dial on channel 17. The static came instantly, dense, wet, heavy, but beneath it there was a rhythm, a pattern, like a heartbeat. Slowly it grew clearer. "Maintain heading 47° north," the voice murmured, distant but deliberate. Then came a low groan, metal bending, waves colliding, and what sounded like a ship's horn calling through centuries of water. Elliot stared at the signal monitor. The transmission wasn't random. It was moving. The coordinates were changing in real time, pulling northward toward the open sea. Unable to resist, Elliot rented a small fishing trawler under the guise of doing field research. The harbour master tried to stop him. "That channel isn't for men," the old man warned. "It's for the dead." But Elliot only smiled, shaking off the unease. By nightfall he was miles from shore, the sky a thick blanket of cloud and fog. The radio hissed softly in the corner, its red light pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, around 2:17 a.m., the sea beneath him changed. The waves grew strangely calm, as though something massive just below had smoothed their motion. And then he saw it rising out of the fog like a phantom. A ship, enormous, black, silent. At first, it looked impossible. The hull was rusted yet untouched, its nameplate worn away but faintly legible beneath layers of corrosion. SS Artemis. Elliot recognized it instantly. It was the same vessel listed as lost in the Lazarus report. No ship that deep could have resurfaced intact. Yet here it was, floating as if it had never sunk. No light, no sound, only the low creak of metal shifting in the current. The air around it shimmered faintly, bending the fog like heat on asphalt. Elliot felt his stomach twist. He grabbed his camera, his recorder, anything to prove what he was seeing. But when he looked through the lens, there was nothing. The ship vanished. Only water, only mist. Yet when he lowered the camera, there it was again, closer now, its bow angled toward his small boat. Then the radio spoke. Not static, not interference, a full, living voice. "Crewman Ward, welcome aboard." The trawler rocked violently as a cold wind swept across the deck. Every light flickered out, and for a moment the world went black. Elliot could hear the sound of footsteps on metal, heavy, deliberate, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The fog swallowed everything. He screamed, but no echo came back, only the endless hum of the deep, and the faint toll of a ship's bell ringing from beneath the sea. When the Coast Guard found his boat 3 days later, it was adrift, engine dead, equipment fried. Elliot was gone, but the log recorder was still running. The final entry played back through static and distortion, his voice trembling, whispering the same phrase again and again. "It's not a ship, it's a signal." The night after the Coast Guard report, the small coastal town of Havers Bay was unusually quiet. No fishermen ventured out, and even the gulls had abandoned the docks. The water was still, unnaturally still, like a mirror of black glass stretching toward the horizon. Inside the local bar, Cole, the young deckhand who had warned Elliot, sat with a trembling glass in his hand. The radio behind the counter flickered to life, catching a single pulse on channel 17. The bartender froze. It was Elliot's voice, unmistakable, faint but clear. "Maintain heading 47° north," followed by the same metallic groan, that ancient hull twisting in the dark. The bartender turned the volume down instantly, pale as chalk. "Turn that off," Cole whispered, voice breaking. "That's the trench calling again." But the sound didn't stop. Even when the radio was unplugged, a faint murmur still hummed beneath the static, almost like breathing. By morning, rumors had spread across Havers Bay like a sickness. Some said the dead captain of the Artemis was sending orders from the deep, commanding anyone who heard him to return to the sea. Others swore they saw a black ship moving through the fog at dawn, its lights flickering underwater like lanterns beneath the waves. The Coast Guard dismissed it all as hysteria, a product of bad weather and maritime myth. But the locals knew better. They had seen the fog thicken before, had heard the sound of the horn at night when no vessel was due to dock. They spoke of the deep orders, commands whispered through static, calling lost sailors by name. The first to go missing after Elliot was Cole himself. His boat was found tied loosely to the dock, engine idling, but no sign of him anywhere. Only a small waterlogged notebook on the seat. A single page visible, written in shaky letters. He called my name. Weeks passed. The disappearances continued. A research submersible vanished while investigating sonar pings in the same sector. A diver from the naval base nearby went missing. His oxygen tank washing ashore days later. The gauge still reading full. Each time, before someone disappeared, witnesses reported hearing the same low hum, like a ship's engine idling just below the surface. Local news dubbed it the Lazarus Signal. Scientists called it an audio illusion caused by deep-sea pressure and natural radio wave reflection. But at night, people could hear it through their walls. That distant pulse, slow and rhythmic, vibrating like a heartbeat beneath the earth. And with it came a whisper, not just a sound, but a voice, slipping through dreams, through the static of televisions, through the wind that rolled off the tide. It never shouted, it only whispered, patiently, calmly, calling. One evening, a team from the university arrived. Oceanographers and sound engineers, armed with sonar buoys and electromagnetic scanners. They set up camp near the northern cliffs, directly above the coordinates Elliot had last recorded. Their goal was simple: locate the source of the transmission and prove it was nothing but geological interference. But the deeper they lowered their instruments, the stranger the readings became. Pressure dropped unnaturally. Sonar returned images that didn't make sense. Structures, straight lines, metallic surfaces moving against the current. Then came the voice again, echoing through every headset at once. Maintain heading! 27 north, followed by another phrase none of them could decipher. Something in a language older than English. A language that felt like the ocean itself was trying to speak. Within hours, the team's instruments failed. Their last data stream contained a blurred sonar scan, showing what looked unmistakably like a ship's silhouette rising from below, over 2 miles deep. At dawn, the cliffs were empty. Only the wind remained, and the faint scent of rust and salt in the air. The next morning, the Coast Guard recovered one of the buoys, half crushed as though by enormous pressure. When they played back its final recording, it wasn't static. It was the sound of footsteps, heavy boots walking across metal floors, distant orders being barked in clipped military tones, and beneath it all, the slow creak of a ship shifting in the current. The final voice came clearly, right before the transmission cut out. "This is Captain Ward. All crew accounted for. Prepare to submerge," the officers froze. Captain Ward had died in 1983. The same year the Artemis was lost. Yet here he was, speaking as if he had never left his post. The frequency analysis confirmed it. The voice matched historical recordings perfectly. The orders were being repeated every night at 03:14, the exact time of the original disaster. But each night, the transmission grew louder, closer, as though the ship wasn't below anymore, but rising. The people of Havers Bay stopped sleeping. The fog rolled in earlier, thicker, pressing against their windows like breath. Radios turned on by themselves, boats untied without wind. And always, always, the same whisper through the static, calm and patient. Maintain heading. 27 north. The storm came 3 nights later. Not wind, not thunder, just fog. A wall of it. It rolled in from the sea and swallowed the town whole. The lighthouse beam could barely pierce through 50 feet of it. And yet, beneath the silence, the residents could hear it. A distant, low rumble, like engines turning over miles below the surface. The Coast Guard tried to send out another search boat, but their systems glitched. Compasses spun wildly. Sonar filled with static. That night, even the tide refused to rise. The ocean simply waited. Then, sometime after midnight, the frequency returned. Every radio, every phone, every forgotten speaker in Havers Bay came alive at once. The voice wasn't faint anymore. It was strong, commanding. "Crew of the Artemis," it said, clear as a man standing in the room. "Report to deck. Prepare for descent. Miles offshore, a research vessel named the Calliope, the last funded expedition to locate the lost submersible Project Lazarus, anchored above the trench." Inside, Dr. Elaine Rowe, the expedition leader, reviewed Elliot's last notes and the Coast Guard logs. Her voice recorder ran constantly. Her last words before the signal hit were calm, clinical. Commencing descent sequence. Sonar depth 3,100 meters. Water temperature. Then came the interruption. Not interference, a reply. A man's voice. "Temperature irrelevant, Doctor. You are cleared for descent." The voice wasn't one of her crew. It wasn't human. But before she could react, every depth gauge spiked. The ship shuddered. From the deck, the crew reported seeing shapes in the fog. Towering, jagged, almost like the ribs of a colossal ship pushing upward beneath the waves. And then the Calliope began to sink. Slowly at first, then violently. Its anchor lines snapped like thread. Elaine ordered emergency surfacing, but the controls wouldn't respond. The vessel kept descending as though something below was pulling it. Lights flickered, metal groaned, and water began leaking through the lower hatches. She glanced at the external monitors and froze. There, in the darkness below, a faint glow emerged. Rows of windows, circular and rusted, drifting upward from the trench like eyes opening one by one. As the Calliope sank further, those windows revealed themselves to be portholes lining the hull of another ship, the Artemis. It wasn't wreckage anymore. It was moving, a black titan in the deep, its deck lights blinking faintly, powered by something impossible. Elaine could see shapes moving behind the portholes, figures standing in formation, heads bowed, waiting. The radio crackled again. The same calm tone. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Rowe. Crew of the Calliope, stand by for inspection." The crew panicked. Some prayed, others screamed. But Elaine felt calm. The signal had a pull, a rhythm that seemed to slow her heartbeat, quiet her fear. The deeper they went, the louder it became. An orchestra of metal and pressure, alive and resonant. The hull creaked like a heartbeat, echoing through bone. When they reached 4,000 meters, the floodlights cut out entirely. For a moment, only blackness. Then suddenly, the sea outside shimmered like liquid glass. The Artemis's hull was inches away, covered in barnacles and coral, but somehow intact. Its nameplate gleaming under an impossible light. And then the portholes lit up one by one, every window revealing a face. Dozens of them, pale, hollow, eyes open but unblinking. Each face turned toward the Calliope, as if recognizing something familiar. One of the crew shouted, "They're alive!" Another screamed, "No, they're looking at us!" A hollow clang echoed through the Calliope's hull. Something had attached to it. Then another. The crew rushed to seal the lower hatch, but water burst through in a violent surge. In the chaos, Elaine caught sight of the external camera feed. The Artemis was connecting to them, long black cables stretching from its hull, latching onto their vessel like veins merging. The monitors shorted out one by one. But before the last one died, Elaine saw a figure step onto the Calliope's deck. He wore a soaked naval coat, his eyes clouded with grey. His mouth moved slowly, whispering the same words again and again. The mic caught it clearly. All hands accounted for. Moments later, the Calliope's lights vanished from radar. The storm lifted by morning, leaving only empty sea and silence. But the signal didn't stop. It changed. The voice no longer called for coordinates. It issued orders. Surface Patrol, Section 9 complete. Report of breach confirmed. Pressure stable. Each line was precise, mechanical, like the log of a functioning ship. The horrifying truth spread quickly across the maritime networks. Someone, or something, was operating under the identity of the long-lost SS Artemis, transmitting fresh logs daily with modern timestamps. The coordinates matched the trench north of Havers Bay. But every night, the signal moved closer to the coast. And now, when fishermen tuned in, the voice didn't just give orders, it spoke their names. By the fifth night, residents began hearing it even without radios, through drain pipes, through the hum of refrigerators, through the ringing in their ears when the town went silent. The captain's voice had found a new medium. Those who heard it too long vanished by dawn, leaving wet footprints on the floorboards, a faint trail leading to the shore, and the echo of footsteps on metal long after the sea had gone still again. For days, the voice ruled the coast. Radios refused silence. Even with power cut, the hum continued. Faint, rhythmic, pulsing through the walls like blood through veins. The people of Havers Bay stopped speaking to one another. They simply listened. Some said the voice brought comfort, like a lullaby rising from the ocean floor. Others said it brought memory. Dreams of waves, salt and pressure, as if each of them had once served aboard a ship they'd never known existed. By the seventh night, the fog rolled in again, denser than before, and every speaker in town turned on simultaneously. The voice was softer now, almost gentle. "Final orders," it said. Surface acknowledged. "The crew is complete." Then came silence. The ocean didn't move. No wind, no sound. Just the hollow stillness of a world holding its breath. The next morning, a satellite image captured something impossible. The faint outline of a massive structure beneath the bay. Symmetrical, mechanical, hundreds of meters long. Government ships arrived within hours, cordoning off the area under environmental hazard protocols. They dropped sonar buoys, scanned the depths, and confirmed a reading. A hull, metal, power signatures. But as soon as the submersible drones approached, every feed cut to black. All communication went dead for 9 minutes. When the systems rebooted, the Artemis was gone. Vanished, not sunken, simply absent. In its place was only the seabed, smooth and bare, as though something immense had lifted off the floor of the ocean. A week later, a container washed ashore. It was rusted, sealed tight, marked with a serial number that matched Project Lazarus. Inside was a waterproof data core, still blinking. When investigators played the recovered logs, they found Elliot's voice again. Calm, steady, narrating in first person, as if dictating a report from aboard the Artemis itself. "This is Crewman Ward," he began. "The mission continues. Orders received. Depth unconfirmed. Status sustained." Then another voice joined him. Doctor rose, repeating coordinates that spiraled into static. But at minute 7, the recording distorted. The background noise changed. The sound of waves replaced by the unmistakable creak of a deck. Footsteps echoing through a hollow corridor. Elliot's voice returned, but different now. Lower, slower. "The captain's not who I thought he was," he said. "He's not commanding a ship. He is the ship." The final minutes of the recording were chaos. Shouting, alarms, rushing water. And then one last whisper before the tape ended. "He's rebuilding the crew," one voice at a time. Officials declared it a hoax, a misinterpreted transmission stitched together by sound anomalies. They buried the incident, sealed the records, and dismantled the radio towers around Havers Bay. The town emptied within months, but the ocean didn't forget. Fishermen miles away still caught fragments of that signal. Orders given in calm tones, sometimes followed by a name. Sometimes that name belonged to someone who'd recently disappeared. By year's end, maritime authorities logged 17 more missing vessels along the northern current. Every case file ended the same way. Last known contact, frequency unknown, audio corruption consistent with the Lazarus pattern. Then came the broadcast that ended everything. On a quiet night, a cargo ship crossing the Pacific picked up a faint message. It wasn't static. It was a live channel. A man's voice came through, weary but composed. "This is Artemis. Command active. All systems operational. Crew present." Then a long pause, a sigh. The voice continued, softer, more human now. "If anyone receives this, don't come looking. The sea doesn't take us. It recruits us." And then a final sound. The toll of a ship's bell fading into the deep, followed by a heartbeat so slow it almost wasn't one at all. The channel went silent at exactly 03:14, the same minute every transmission had once begun. To this day, no one knows what the Artemis truly was. A ghost, a machine, a consciousness of the sea itself. But sometimes, in late hours when the water is calm and the fog drifts inland, people still hear the hum beneath their floorboards. A low vibration, steady and patient. If they listen closely enough, they can almost make out the words. Calm, commanding, familiar. Maintain heading 47° north. Crew accounted for. Awaiting your arrival. And though the surface remains calm, divers have reported a strange sight just below the bay. A single rusted bell swaying gently in the current, engraved with one name, E. Ward. They say that if you listen at the right hour, it rings once, not with sound but with pressure. A pulse that passes through bone, through steel, through signal, not calling for help, calling for completion. The captain still speaks, they whisper, not through radios, not through the sea, but through memory, through every person who's ever listened to that static for too long, who's ever heard the ocean hum and wondered if it was whispering back. He doesn't command ships anymore. He commands voices, and when the tide pulls back and the fog rises once more, those who still live by the coast swear they can see it, the outline of a vast shadow beneath the surface, drifting silently, eternally, like a dream that refuses to die. The last ship, the endless signal, the captain who still sends orders from the deep.